Alright, I'm recording this in September of 2022, just before the feds are going to announce another potential rate hike. Now, I was just watching a debate about whether we're going to have inflation or deflation, and how bad deflation would be for the economy. Well, I lived through a hyper-deflation environment, not the kind that you're probably thinking of, not very broad-based. When I was 7 years old, I wrote my first computer program ever. It calculated the sum of all the numbers from 1 to 100. To give you a little bit of background, that was my favorite math problem when I was a kid. I used to love to add all the numbers from 1 up to something, just by hand, just to practice adding. And I think I was 5 years old when I was doing this, and I was sitting in the car. My mom was driving me somewhere. And I had tried to add the numbers from 1 to 100, and I knew the answer. It was 5,050. I had done it a number of times, but that time I got the wrong answer. I made a mistake somewhere. When I got to 100, I had the wrong answer, and I was so frustrated. I was doing it on a stack of paper, and I tore the paper to shreds. And I threw it in the car. I was just really frustrated. And my mom got distracted from me screaming and almost got into a car accident, and she was really upset. She screamed at me. And then a few years later, I was programming this into the computer. I was using a 286 computer that had maybe a few kilobytes of RAM, if I remember correctly. And I learned that my dad had bought the computer in the 1980s. He bought it used from their campus, college campus. He was working on his PhD at the University of Wisconsin, and he paid $3,000 for it. Had he bought it new, it would have been $5,000-6,000. And 30 years later, I'm programming the #1 backgammon AI in the world. I'm using a Lenovo ThinkPad that has 128 gigabytes of RAM. To give you an idea, some of these endgame table bases that I'm calculating, we're storing the results of all of the endgame positions of 15 or fewer pieces. And so it has a few million times the amount of memory, and I paid about the same dollar amount. In terms of gold, it's a lot less, right? So he paid, my dad, he paid about 10 ounces of gold for that 286 computer. I paid a little bit over 2 ounces of gold at the time that I bought it. So for 5 times less, I have a computer that's a million times more powerful, right? Can you imagine if other things deflated like that? We would call that a depression, right? Now, why? The problem is that most people don't have dollars or even gold. They owe people dollars, they owe people gold, right? And so deflation increases their debt levels. And that's a very wacky society we live in, right? Normally we want things to go down in price, right? We want it to be easier. Imagine other forms of deflation in your life, right? If you have things that are easier to do, right? It's a lot easier for us to cook our food today than it was 10,000 years ago. That's a form of deflation in terms of the amount of resources we need to have a good quality of life, right? Imagine you had to worry about being eaten by a bear in the middle of the night, right? We generally don't have to worry about. That's a form of deflation, right? But we've created a wacky society where up is down, down is up, right? It's kind of funny when you think about it, right?